Welcome, everybody, to the Financial Freedom Fighters podcast. Back with another episode today. I'm your host, Jacob. I have with me my co-host, Mike Magno. What's going on, Mike? How you doing?
Jacob, what's up, brother? I am doing great. It is, it's a cloudy, kind of misty, kind of crazy day here in Cleveland. However, one quick shout out, not that she'll ever listen to this episode, but Peyton, my stepdaughter, who did our artwork, our cover artwork for the podcast. Yes. Today is her 16th birthday.
The Sweet 16.
Sweet 16. So we've got a little party set up for her this weekend on Sunday. And one of her friends also has today as their birthday. And she's actually on her way to their party, their birthday party. So shout out to Peyton. Love you, kid. And you're welcome. I let you skip school today. That was her birthday gift.
Wow.
That was her birthday gift. Let her skip school today.
Happy Sweet 16 to Peyton. What an awesome gift from our wonderful co-host, Mike. Skip school. That's huge. That's awesome.
Right. I can't believe because I'm usually, I'm a ball breaker. I can't believe I let her skip school, but
you're going soft on us, Mike. You're going soft on us.
I'm getting soft.
Cool. My dog's going crazy in the background, but we're just going to keep forging ahead.
Hey, we're regular guys, right? Like, I mean, Felix the Pity, he's back here on his bed in my office. So
there you go.
But he doesn't make a sound. That dog never makes a sound. So
something you didn't know about your Financial Freedom Fighters hosts is we are big dog lovers.
What are we talking about today, Jacob? What are we talking about?
A bunch of common mistakes that new investors make. So Mike and I felt that this was a very important topic because in my investing career, Mike's investing career, we've made a ton of mistakes. And there's a lot of learning to be had within those mistakes. Mistakes are often the best teachers in so many instances. What Mike and I want to do today is kind of go through what these mistakes are and really trying to share our own stories in hopes that we can prevent you from making the same mistakes, right? If we've made them, hopefully you don't have to make them. That's, I think, the most valuable thing we can do today is to kind of just share our knowledge, share a little bit of our pain. So Mike, before we kind of jump into the episode today, what do you think about this topic?
No, I think it's a great topic. I feel like these are reasons why people sit on the fence. They sit on the sideline. And I've said it multiple times on this format before, and I'll say it multiple times, I'm sure, in the future. There's no better teacher than doing. And you can skip a lot of the grief and the heartache by listening to us talk about our mistakes. But mistakes are part of the game, and you have to understand that mistakes are going to happen. You can try to plan for everything, but if you try to plan for everything, you're going to look at it and go, oh my gosh, I can't do this.
Absolutely. So know that mistakes are going to happen. They're part of the game, but to the extent that you can familiarize yourself with the mistakes that other investors have made, like Mike and I are about to share with you today, maybe you don't repeat that exact mistake and you kind of avoid those. And there is real money to be saved in not making these mistakes that Mike and I are about to share with you today. So we'll kind of roll into the first one. I'll kick us off, Mike, and I think we'll both kind of just go back and forth with some of these. But the first one I had listed here is not running your numbers properly. Mike drilled this into my head when we first started investing together, which was, this is a numbers game. Everything about real estate is a numbers game. And it's, to be quite honest, pretty simple math. If you can add, subtract, do a little bit of multiplication, you can do real estate math, right? It's not very complicated, but you have to stick to the numbers. I'll give an example. The first property that I ever bought, which was supposed to be a primary residence, it was in Portland, Oregon. We bought that house for $555,000, which seemed like a steal because we were living in California at the time and everything was, $1.2 million or higher in terms of the houses we were looking at. So we were just like, oh, this is a great deal. We ended up turning that into an investment property, and the rent that we could get for that investment property at that time was $2,800, right? $2,800. Knowing what I know now that was enough to cover the principal, interest, taxes, insurance, because the interest rates were so low at that time. And so I was like, this is great. And that's actually what hooked me on a real estate investing. But knowing what I know now, that's not a very good deal in terms of the numbers, the 1% rule. I spent $555,000 on that house and I'm only getting half of that in rent effectively when I should be getting a lot more. Now, if I had taken that same property value and purchased a property in Cleveland, Ohio, for example, we're probably talking multi units, and getting the 1% rule all day. And so that's just an example of, understand the numbers that you're running, understand what the ROI is going to be, and know what those numbers are. I have a rental property calculator that's free, that's available to you. There's a ton of calculators out there. Know what are the inputs, know what are the formulas, know how to calculate cash on cash return. And that's kind of the angle that I'm taking. I know you're going to take it in a different direction, Mike, but understand what the numbers are to just understand if the property is going to cash flow, period, and stick to those numbers. But Mike, I know you have things to say about this one as well.
Yeah, no, you made awesome points about your first experience with the Portland property, and the differences between the different types of markets that we're in the country. And the biggest thing with not running the numbers is just understanding that those mistakes will happen, and hopefully you don't get burned by them. In your instance, there was other circumstances because you guys were actually going to physically move there. So you did a lower down payment. So then your PITI was higher. So then your cash flow was obviously lower. But for me, one of the things I wanted to talk about on this topic today was, underestimating expenses, right? This is a common mistake people make. And in my investing career, the mistake has been in the rehab side of things, right? I've never gotten one right, never. So I'm gonna share a quick story, so that people know, like, we're human, right?
Yeah.
I think it was our third flip my dad and I did together, and he goes, are you ever gonna fucking get these numbers right? Because I was like $13,000 over budget for the rehab.
That's hilarious.
And that, I mean, when you're over budget on a rehab, where's it come out of? It comes out of your profit, right? Now, I can honestly sit here and say I've never lost money on a rehab.
There you go.
Have I had rehabs that didn't make nearly as much money as I would have hoped? Sure. I can sit here and I can say that for one reason or another. Either the rehab took too long, or the rehab went over budget, or I missed something. Like, we make mistakes as investors, right? Great example of a mistake was on one of our rehabs from 2023. I bought the house into winter, and the driveway, when I bought the house, when I walked the house, the driveway was completely covered in snow and ice and everything else. And wouldn't you know it, when spring rolled around and everything thawed out, that driveway was wrecked. And when you're doing a rehab project, right, and you roll up in the prospective buyers are going to roll up to that property, and they would have saw a wrecked driveway. Like, it was a concrete driveway, and it was a disaster. It was cracked, and in the back by the garage, it was raised like 6 inches. So it was a mess. So I had to bite the bullet. Right. I was one of those, an uncomfortable phone call, because my dad was my partner on that one as well. When I had to call him and say, hey, we really got to replace this driveway, and anyone who's gotten a concrete driveway replaced recently knows that that's not a cheap problem. So, but we got it done, and yes, it took $6,000 or $7,000 out of our budget. Over our budget rather on that one. But,
with that being the case, Mike, that you have never accurately kind of landed this budget, how do you take that and account for it now? Do you have the, oh crap, kind of line item in your estimated expenses?
Yeah. So I target a certain return on the flips, and there's enough margin to where if you make a mistake, you're not going to be upside down. That's how I do it. And it's funny, you have that great calculator that you've built. I literally analyze properties on a notebook, on a piece of paper when I'm doing a rehab. I visualize it much better that way. I'm just one of those weird. So, like, I literally do my analysis. This is terrible. I'm going to admit this, but a lot of it's basically back of the napkin, right? And I use the 70% rule for pretty much everything.
Let's break that down for the listeners.
Yeah. So the 70% rule is when you're doing a flip, 70% of the purchase price less the rehab, right? So you're baking in a 30% margin. And if you hit all your numbers and you get that 30% margin, well, you're not going to really get that because you also have expenses. You're going to have sales expenses on the other side, which are typically 5 to 8%. So your margin then becomes 22 to 25%, right? That's a good margin, because on $100,000, right, that's a $25,000 return. And if you do it in 6 months, annualize, it's really a 50% return on your money. So that's where it gets, it's the way you frame it and think about it. So what I do is I take the ARV, and as an agent, I calculate the ARV pretty quickly. I've been doing it so much, like you can just kind of give me an address and the square footage and the layout of the house, and I can already know in my mind like what that ARV should be. But I'll dig deeper. If I like the deal, I'll dig deeper, and I'll run an analysis through the MLS, and I'll pull comps, and I'll compare them and contrast them, and then I'll come up with an ARV. And I typically come up with a range. I'll come up with a low range and a high range, and then I typically will build my personal numbers off of the lower end of the range because I want some safeguards, some guardrails, and then I'll take the 70%, right? So boom, let's just in this example say, for math purposes, $100,000 ARV, automatically we're down to $70,000. And if the rehab I'm estimating is going to be $30,000, that means I got to buy the place for $40 for it to be a profitable flip. Now, mind you, I'm also paying with, in that type of deal, I'd be paying cash. So I don't have a ton of holding costs. So those ratios need to be different for different people for different acquisition strategies. Because if you're using hard money, well then, hot damn, you're going to need to bake in some more cost. You might need to use 65% of the ARV or 60% of the ARV minus the rehab because you've got some holding costs and things like that. So
on the topic of not running your numbers, I'll kind of give just like another quick example here. When I bought my first property in Cleveland, Ohio, it was a duplex on the west side that Mike helped me find, obviously. And I was running my numbers on there. I thought I was doing everything right. Like I had my calculator. I was kind of running those numbers. And we ended up getting that property under contract, and I secured that deal. But when I was kind of revalidating some of my assumptions with Mike, he let me know that, hey, the water bill, that's the responsibility of the landlord. And the reason why that is because this is a duplex. So it's a 2-unit property, but the water was not separately metered. And if the water's not separately metered and you can't really legally split the usage out, so you can't bill that back to the tenant, that is the responsibility of the landlord. And that was margin, profitability, cash flow in the deal that I thought was just going to go straight to my pocket. And so I share this with you to say, make sure you understand the utility situation when you're buying your rental property. For single family houses, this doesn't apply because single family houses only has one tenant, only has one set of utilities. Everything can be basically attributed back to the usage of that tenant. So that's also just highlighting maybe some of the strengths of single family versus multifamily in that the utilities are just more clean, but maybe you're going to get a lot more rent on the multifamily versus a single family. But I just didn't know that. And Mike educated me on that. And that's a little bit of cash flow that I'm giving up, but it's learnings that I have going forward, knowing that to kind of bake that into the deals going forward. We'll kind of like move on to the next topic here. I think we run your numbers, whether that be for an investment property or for a flip, and kind of double, triple check those things and make sure you understand what are the expenses that you're looking at and make sure you're not forgetting any, right? Because that can change the dynamics and the returns of your deal. So we'll kind of move on to the next one, which is not doing proper due diligence and research. And so I'll kind of kick this off by saying, what is due diligence, right? Maybe you didn't listen to our past episodes, and that's totally fine. So we can kind of go into that today. Due diligence is the period in the acquisition process where you have an offer under contract and you are going to, take a closer look at that property, both from like a kind of a physical inspection standpoint, and then also making sure that all of your ducks are in a row with your research in terms of, your underwriting and your market research and your neighborhood research. And so that's just the due diligence process as a whole, but we'll kind of zero in on the actual due diligence and the actual inspection of the property. So you're going to be working with an investor-friendly agent that agent is going to link you up and schedule all of the relevant inspections for the home. And Mike will go into more detail on that. But this is your opportunity to really understand what is wrong with the property, if anything, right? Or what are the things to know? I think the biggest thing is, like, as a new investor, you're going to get that home inspection report, Mike, and it's going to freak you out. It's going to be 100 pages. There's going to be a million things that seem like they're really serious, and you're going to want to back out of that deal, right? But the mistake, there's a lot of mistakes to be had here, right? The one mistake is just not doing the inspection, which if you have a good agent, that's not going to be an option, right? They're going to make you inspect the property. But in a competitive environment, people would forego their inspection contingency, which is a massive, massive mistake, especially with an older property. You don't know what you're walking into. There are instances where maybe that's fine, right, Mike? I mean, you have done that because you know what you're getting yourself into, or maybe it's a brand new build or whatever. I don't know, but don't do that. Don't do that. And then the second mistake is to overreact to what you're seeing in the inspection report itself. And Mike is going to kind of get into what are the things that you actually need to pay attention to. So don't overreact, I think, is the second mistake, because that's my instinct as a new investor, or was, and still is sometimes. When I look at inspection reports, I'm like, that seems like a big deal, and Mike will be like, it's not that big of a deal. So Mike, what do you think on this kind of due diligence piece?
Yeah, so the inspections that you're going to perform on a property, they are basically a microscope on which you're looking at the property, right? It's going to look daunting, right? That report comes through your email in a PDF, and it's 55 pages or it's 60 pages long, and it's got pictures, and it's got red ink, and it's got, so here's what I tell people. It's, the home inspection is basically a report card of the property, right? And there are going to be things that are going to be marginal. There are things that are going to be, defective, or there's going to be things that are like, oh God, like this has to be done like right now. And what could those things be? Some of it would be marginal. A handrail is missing going to a basement. Like that happens a lot here. You walk into a property, there's no handrail. What's another thing that would be marginal? A GFCI outlet in a basement, right? Because it's considered a wet location. Code would say that you're supposed to have a GFCI outlet. Or garages are another one where we see a ton of outlets where they're not GFCI protected, right? That's such a little thing, to like get your twisted up about. And what I tell investors too, and you as well, Jacob, the major things that we want to look at from the inspection perspective are your major systems, right? What are the major systems that we talk about in a property? Those are the CapEx things, the capital expenditures that are going to cost you the most money. So for me, those items are, and they're not in any particular order of importance, but they're roof, windows, siding, right? So basically the exterior shield of the property, and then foundation and mechanical systems, right? So that would be furnace and or air conditioning, electrical, and plumbing, right? People might lump, a hot water tank in there. Hot water tanks are cheap. They're going to break. They are what they are. They're really not, in my opinion, CapEx. They're more of they're a wear item, right? They wear out. They're like brake pads on a car. And then the other thing that you're looking at is obviously cosmetic things in a property, right? If you're buying a property that has tenants in it that have been in there for 8 years, well, it's a pretty good assumption that the carpets are worn out, right? The walls are going to need painted, right? I live in a house that was built in 2015. We've been here since 2015, and I look around at some of the walls and I'm like, damn, that's pretty tired, right? They're marred up, they're beat up, So there are those things that you're going to have to deal with at tenant turnover, things like that. But those are just, those are very ancillary. But the biggest things that we want to make sure that we're doing good with is those major items.
Yeah, definitely. And just to kind of put more of a point on that, the Portland house, we bought that in a low interest rate environment, extremely competitive. And while we still did our inspection, there just wasn't a lot of flexibility to kind of go back to the sellers and try to negotiate anything based on what we found. And what we did find is that the sellers were selling this house at the exact time that all their major systems were at their useful life. So the roof needed to be replaced. The hot water tank was basically like too old. The furnace needed to be replaced. The fireplace wasn't working anymore. Like, all their major systems needed to be replaced. And because we were in a competitive environment, we couldn't do anything about that. Now, we did actually have some pretty good agents, and they were actually able to negotiate a new hot water tank and some like repairs and things like that. So there were some things that we did, but effectively, right, the roof need to be replaced. And these are all things that we need to factor into the overall picture of buying the home. And so to Mike's point, you have to know what those are, and you have to know what the costs associated are. At the triplex that I had, we obviously did due diligence on that triplex, but one of the furnaces, that was from 2010, it just went out. It just went out, and we tried to, replace the circuit board, and we tried to repair it, spent like $500, $600 repairing it, but then it went out again. And we had a couple guys take a look at it, and I think a furnace should have a longer useful life than just 2010, but this one was just fried. Like, I don't think they did any sort of ongoing maintenance of it, and I think that's what happened. But that was, and then the funny thing was, my property manager, they said, yeah, we're going to need to replace this. It's going to be like $6,500 or something, $7,000. That was kind of the quote that they gave us. And I said, can we just like get a few more quotes? Because that seems like a lot. And we found one that was only $4,500 for basically the same furnace. And I was like, I'm just so glad that I asked for multiple bids. I was going to pay like $6,500. And that was just the first quote that they got, because that property management company has a relationship, I'm sure, with this like first vendor. But I saved just like $2,000 just because I asked to look at other things. But in general, those are instances where, it's not very fun to have those surprise expenses. So we didn't find it, like it was still working when we did the inspection of the furnace, but could I have maybe taken a closer look at it? Maybe, but it seemed fine.
Yeah, no, that's an extreme case. A 2010 furnace should not take a dump on you. For everyone, that shouldn't happen. Now, to Jacob's point, did the previous owner not do proper maintenance? That's a pretty good possibility that he did not have it serviced annually, right? Furnaces should be serviced annually. They get a lot of dust and dirt and buildup in there, especially if the tenants aren't, diligent about changing out the filters and stuff. So, they should be serviced annually. It's good peace of mind for $100, for $125 to get your furnaces serviced every year. And they should last 25, 30 years. They should.
Yep. So, well, I have a brand new furnace now. Is what it is. Comes with the game. But again, mistakes, right? And I don't necessarily know that was my mistake, but for you, the listener, to just be aware, like Mike is saying, be aware of these kind of big ticket items and be aware of the condition of them. So when you're going through the inspection report, maybe your inspector did kind of flag that this is like a funky looking furnace and it's working fine, but maybe you do double click into that information. And while you're in the due diligence, you say to your realtor, like, hey, I'm kind of suspect on this furnace. And maybe they'll tell you, hey, I think it's fine. Or you can actually get a second opinion, on the furnace specifically. And that maybe that will give you some peace of mind.
That happens a lot too.
Yeah.
Like we'll do an inspection on a property and a furnace will be, short cycling, or it won't be running properly. I can think of an instance on a deal that I did last year on a furnace that was like 2019 and it wasn't running right at the inspection. And it was a simple fix, but we still required the seller to have it fixed. Like, it's a 2019 furnace on a deal in 2023. There definitely shouldn't be anything wrong with a 4-year-old furnace. So, part of our removal of contingencies, we said, hey, we want a reputable HVAC company to come, assess this furnace, provide to us what it needs, and then make the fix. And it was like a flame sensor needed to be replaced or something. It was $100. It was $100 part. But because the seller hadn't had it cleaned in 4 years that it had been there, the part went bad.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other one that I see a lot of new investors. So I talk to a lot of first time investors, people that are hoping to, or, doing their first deal, right? I talk to a lot of people that they've been researching real estate, they've been learning, and they're kind of jumping in doing their first deal. And whenever they tell me that they got under contract and they're doing inspections, I always ask the same thing. I'm like, are you getting the sewer scoped? Because it's one thing that is like often overlooked by a lot of first time investors. And so that's one thing I'll add, is to just ask your agent, hey, I want to get the sewer scoped. And the severity of that is probably going to depend on the age of the property. But that's just like another factor that a lot of people don't consider. Older properties have clay or cast iron kind of sewer pipes, and those degrade over time. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but they just get old. But if you have a property that's built probably after the 1980s, you have PVC sewer pipes, which last forever. Not forever, but you know what I mean? They last a long time. But that's just one of the items that don't forget to do that, because that could be a massive headache for you down the road if it's not working properly. So that's one additional one that I'll highlight. And this probably all seems like a lot, but I also have put together, in addition to the rental property calculator, I put together kind of a property inspection checklist, not necessarily like a checklist, but just highlighting all the major items Mike and I talked about, because for the new investor, it's easy to freak out. So think about this as like the translator for a home inspection report, to say like, okay, let's focus on these big systems. Obviously still get the inspection report, but these are the items you kind of want to double down on. And so you can get that on my website if that's helpful at all to you. Mike, I'll keep us rolling here. So the next one that I want to talk about is the mistake of not starting early enough. So this is a little bit of a different one, but I think it's one that probably anybody that's investing in real estate feels that they've made. I know you and I were just talking about it, Mike, and I feel that way as well. If I had invested in real estate, even just 5 years ago, right? Even just 5 years ago, the amount of growth that's been happening in the real estate industry over the past 5 years in pretty much any market, it's pretty phenomenal, right? Real estate's been on an amazing run. There's a lot of kind of macroeconomic factors that have been driving that. I still feel like those macroeconomic factors exist. Those tailwinds still exist for the real estate industry. But if I was investing 5 years ago, I would probably be fairly close to achieving financial freedom already, just based on like the growth that real estate has seen in that time. Now, the proverb says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time to plant a tree is now. And so, but all this to say, don't make the mistake of thinking that I'll get to it. I'll get to it later. I'll invest in real estate. You don't know how many people I've talked to that says, I always said I was going to do it, and I just never did. And then they're in their kind of mid to late 40s, and they're just like, if I just started investing at your age. So I hear that often. And even myself, I feel, I could have gotten started earlier, but don't make the mistake of thinking that it's too late, that you're just going to get to it eventually, because you're not going to get to it eventually, right? Like you have to make the time for it. But what do you have to say about this one, Mike? Not getting started early enough.
I mean, you hit the nail right on the head with the best time to start investing in real estate was yesterday. The next best time to start is today. I got a super late start too. I've told my story many times about getting started in real estate at the age of 37, and didn't really start investing in real estate until, I was in my 40s. And even just in the last 3 years, the amount of growth I've seen in myself and my business and my wealth has been, profound is the best way for me to describe it. So, and we have a very, instant gratification kind of society. And I think that's another way people struggle with it, is if they can't have it now, if I can't have that $5,000 a month in cash flow now, then I just won't do it. And it's like, no, you just need to, you need to start, you need to start getting after it, not to throw another cliche out there, but I don't know if it's an Abe Lincoln or something. I can't remember exactly, but when you're chopping down a tree, right? How many you spend, it might take you 5 hours to chop down a tree. Well, you spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe, right? And then you dig in. So For me, just taking more swings at it and getting more involved and doing more deals, and you learn, and you learn from people like us who have done it, and we've made those mistakes, and they're not going to make those mistakes, right? They're not going to make the mistake of not adding in the water and sewer bill into their due diligence now, and get you rolling, because you just need to start rolling down the hill, and then the snowball gets a little bit bigger, and it'll be a little bigger and a little bit bigger. Even myself, we're our investments, our small and mighty portfolio right now, I mean, it throws off it's not gigantic numbers, but it's a couple $1,000s a month in cash flow, because we've got leverage and stuff. But
this kind of ties to another one too, which is the fact that, like, you touched on this, Mike, but people want this instant gratification, right? They don't have the patience. And I'll be very, very clear with this. One property is not going to change your life overnight, right? It's just not. This is a get rich slow game. You need to have patience with real estate. You have one property, it starts to cash flow a little bit, and then you run into some issues. Maybe the furnace goes out. And then some people are like, oh, this real estate stuff just doesn't work. Just doesn't work. And so you sell that property, and then you just get out of the game, and you didn't give real estate enough time. You didn't have, the cash flow grow, the appreciation, compounding. You didn't get that second deal that's going to be better than the first, or the third that's going to be better than the first two. You didn't see that all of the kind of like benefits of having a portfolio and those little things that start to kind of unlock themselves when you start to kind of grow in this real estate investing game. You didn't see that, like, after year 5, maybe you have a couple properties that have appreciated more than you thought, and you could like sell those and roll them into a much bigger property, right? You don't see that the flexibility that these things start to kind of unveil themselves as you've been doing this a little bit longer. So do not make the mistake of, one, thinking that it's too late to get started, and then 2, not having the patience to see it through, or the fortitude to see it through. I was talking to, an investor I met at a real estate meetup here locally in the Bay Area. I think he also listens to the podcast. Shout out to Mateo. He's, I believe, in his early 20s, and he is very determined to get his first deal. That guy is going to be a multimillionaire before he's 30. I'm convinced of it, because of him taking action right now, him being like thinking, having this mindset already at such an early age. And I can't wait to see what that kid does, because, I don't know that many kids in their early 20s just thinking about real estate. So, shout out Mateo, and shout out to everyone that wants to get started in this game, and just know that you're going to have some patience in this game. But I'll roll us to the next one, Mike, and it's thinking that you can do it alone. Thinking you can do it alone. And so there's a lot of different ways to kind of take this one, but real estate is a team sport. It is a team sport. At the minimum, you're going to need an amazing investor-friendly agent like Mike. At a minimum, you're going to need to have an amazing lender that's going to be able to kind of walk you through the transaction and counsel you through the whole process, like Steve Wiley, who we had on the podcast last. At a minimum, you're going to need an amazing property manager that's going to be managing the day-to-day. And if you think you can do real estate investing at a high level without any of those team members, those core team members, you're going to be sorely mistaken. You're going to be sorely mistaken. I do not know a fraction of what Mike knows about Cleveland real estate. There's no way I could. But I don't need to, because I have Mike. I don't know the ins and outs of lending requirements and things like that, but I don't have to, because I have Steve, right? And I trust that my properties are being taken care of by my property managers. And so I don't have to be an expert in property management. Now, the one thing I'll say is there might be times where you're tempted to self-manage. And Mike, I know you self-manage. It's a little bit different though. You're kind of in this game, and you're local, right? So you can do it, but maybe that's also not going to be the best use of your time at some point too, Mike. We've talked about that as well. But for investors that are like me, who are out-of-state investors, don't think that, or don't even attempt to self-manage. Maybe even if you live locally in that market, like maybe that's just not the right move, because that's going to take you away from what the real game you're playing, which is the investing game. You're not trying to get into the property management game, like unless you're trying to start a property management company. The other kind of direction I'll take this one in is you got to have a network in terms of other investors. You got to have a network of people that are actively in your real estate business helping you out, like Mike and I have just talked about. But you also have to have somewhat of a support system with other investors kind of in your area. So I have, for kind of the past year, I've been really getting a lot of value by going to these real estate meetups kind of locally in the Bay Area, and just learning from other investors and learning the mistakes that they've made, learning about their investing strategies and their markets and things like that, and sharing knowledge. So one thing that I really like about the real estate community is everyone is pretty open to sharing their journey and what they've learned and the shortcomings and the mistakes, just like Mike and I are doing here. So don't go it alone, in a sense. Don't be in a silo, just investing and, reading books and kind of like staying in a cave, so to speak. That's what I did for the first part of my investing. I was just passively listening to Bigger Pockets and reading books, but I didn't have anybody that I knew actually that was doing the same thing or attempting to do the same thing that I did. So that's another thing. Find yourself a network of people that are investors. Follow Mike and I, and we're happy to chat real estate anytime if you want to shoot us a message. But that's another aspect of it. Don't go it alone. So I'll move us to the next one, Mike. One, I'm gonna. This is kind of a big one, but one, I'm calling it not having a strategy in general, right? Not having a strategy in general, and then if you do have a strategy, actually not sticking to that strategy. So, what do we mean by strategy? There's so many different ways to approach real estate investing. You have the type of property that you're trying to go after. Are you trying to go single family, multifamily? Are you doing residential, commercial? There's so many different aspects to what market do you want to pick. Are you indexing on a cash flow market or an appreciation market? Are you going multiple markets, or are you like really going deep into one market, right? Like, what are you doing there? And then just all other aspects to your specific buy box or your specific property selection criteria. Are you looking at blue collar C plus neighborhoods, and that's kind of where you want to be because there's a little bit higher cash flow there? Or are you actually doing a complete different strategy where you're getting in the best school districts and you're getting really nice single family houses and hoping to rent to families that want to be in that kind of like high school district, for a long time? These are all different decisions that you can make, but these are all pieces of your strategy. How long are you going to do this for? How long are you committing yourself to doing this for? Are you buying one property every year for the next 10 years? Or are you buying one property and then the next year trying to like scale that up, and each property is getting bigger and bigger and bigger? Like, what is the plan? What is the vision? What is the strategy? I see a lot of investors just buying just to buy. They're buying in one market, they're buying in another market, they're buying a single family, they're buying multifamily, they're thinking about doing a flip, they're thinking about doing commercial. They're all over the place, right? And there's no clarity of strategy. But anyway, all this to say, and I'll pass it on to you, Mike, is you got to have a strategy and you got to have that clarity, because if you don't have that, you're just going to be spraying and praying, and you don't want to do that. So what do you have to say about that, Mike?
No, those are all phenomenal points that you made. I see this a lot, because I get, I get a lot of people who reach out, to us, and I'll do a consult with them, and they'll be like, yeah, I want to do Section 8. I want to do short-term rentals. I want to BRRRR. And maybe I'll have some land for development too while I'm at it. And it's like, whoa, how many properties do you own? Well, none.
0.
Okay. So let's take a step back. Right. I get personally, the way I kind of frame it with people is, what's their risk tolerance, right? You got to kind of start there. How much capital do you have is important. How much capital are you willing to, put into a deal and risk? And then what's the ultimate goal, right? Like we've talked about it before on previous episodes where, what's the ultimate goal? Because we can reverse engineer it, right? So that's how I kind of tell it with people. And I try to get them to narrow the focus. There's too much of the, in our industry as a real estate agent, we call it the squirrel syndrome, right? Like agents are notorious for this. Like, what's the next shiny object? Especially when it comes to like lead generation stuff or, paid, paying for leads. I'm in a bunch of these Facebook groups, and there's people like, hey, what do you think of this? And what do you think of this? And what do you think of this? And I want to pay for that and pay for this. And it's like, no, come on. Just, I tell people all the time, like, you don't need to spend a bunch of money. You just have to have conversations, on the agent side of the business. What we teach is you need to have 10 to 15 real estate conversations a day. 10 to 15 real estate conversations a day, and you can help build your real estate business as an agent. And then with the strategy thing, why this is important is, my personal thing, right? I buy properties, especially the rehab stuff that we do. I'm not looking to build mansions here. There's guys who do that at a very high level here. It ain't for me. I'm buying 1,500 square foot or less properties so I can get in and I can get out, and I can control my costs, and I can control the project, and I can control all of those variables. So yeah, I'm not taking huge risks. So I'm not going to make huge returns, but I'm consistently making a good return because I've narrowed my buy box down to, what I buy. And we talked about it on a few episodes ago when we were talking about flipping, right? And I mentioned, we talked about that one property that I've owned that I've actually ended up turning it into a BRRRR, but that property started as a wholesale. Then it turned into a rehab. It was going to be a flip. And because I didn't sell it, it ultimately turned into a BRRRR. So I even fell into my own trap. And why do I bring this up? Because I didn't stick to my strategy. I bought outside my zone. It's only one block outside of the zone that I buy. Literally. The zone, it's one block north of where I normally have a line driven on the map where I won't buy outside of that box. And I bought outside of that box, and now look. Now, don't get me wrong. At the end of this long, arduous process for me, I'm still going to make money. I had multiple exit strategies for that property. I bought it good enough. I have enough team members in place to where I was able to control my costs, and I'm still going to make a decent return on that property, right? As a matter of fact, and I don't want to do it to brag, but it's going to be an infinite return because that property, we refinanced out every nickel out of that property.
That's amazing.
So now it's also taken me like 18 months. I've owned that property since July of 2022. It's January 26th of 2024. So it's not, so that's why it's so important to, stick to your strategy, stick to your buy box, formulate it, and roll. So I'm still learning, right? I mean, I'm still learning.
Absolutely.
Hey, that's why we're doing this. We want to share our wins, but we also want to share our mistakes.
You either win or you learn, Mike.
Yeah.
You either win or you learn. And I'm glad that we had a happy ending to that BRRRR, and that you're able to get all of your money out. That was a journey of a deal. And I'm glad it had a happy ending. Oh
man, that was a doozy of a one. Trust me.
Yeah, for sure. So folks, have a buy box, have a strategy, do the work up front to know what that is before you jump into the real estate investing game, and don't build your strategy as you're kind of going along, because if you don't do that and say, you just start buying, you buy something in Cleveland, you buy something in Kansas City, Missouri, you could just end up with like this Frankenstein zombie portfolio, and you just didn't know what you were doing. And then you have to kind of peel the layers back and figure out then what you're doing. So just do the work up front, and you'll be able to move a lot faster. You'll be able to say no to a lot more things, which I think is just massively key in the real estate investing space, is being able to say no, because there's a lot of things that could seem like good ideas, and maybe they in fact are, but if you don't say no to enough things, you're just not going to get really good at finding those things that you do want, right? And so if you don't know what you're looking for, your buy box, you're never going to find it, right? So do the work to identify what you're looking for. So I'll roll this on to the next one, Mike. We're coming up on time, but this one is not continuing to learn and adapt. We've kind of touched on this one already, but the real estate investing game is constantly shifting. Not only are the strategies changing, but the dynamics of different markets are changing. The kind of macroeconomic conditions that impact the real estate industry are changing. Just the norms. I the other day I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about that we're not that far away from 40-year mortgages being a thing, right? And as an investor, you're like, okay, you hear that, and there's a lot of different ways to think about a 40-year mortgage. One, you're paying a lot more money to the bank, but two, that's going to reduce the amount of cash flow. I mean, improve the amount of cash flow because you're reducing, you're increasing the length of time you're paying back that loan, which in the short term is going to help your cash flow, but you're also paying much more to the bank over that time period. But I'm sure there was a time period where 30-year mortgages seem crazy, right? And so those are things that you just have to be aware of. It's like, is there a way as an investor I can actually take advantage of that? Or is that a bad play, right? But if you're not staying in the know about the real estate industry, if you're not staying up to date on what's happening and what's shifting, then you could just be getting dated with how you're kind of approaching the real estate investing game. Like, are you thinking about different ways that you could be approaching the market a little bit differently? Like, are there, you have to stay on top of your game. And so I think what that looks like is listening to podcasts like ours, other different real estate investing podcasts, taking some online courses, reading books, watching YouTube videos, talking to investors, talking to people actually doing deals, and just continuing to learn. Because at the end of the day, it is a long-term game, and we're going to go through many cycles if you're going to be a real estate investor for the long term, and you got to stay on top of it.
You have to stay loose, stay fluid, stay adaptable. Even myself, I've come across things and I, struggle with, and, but you continue to learn, and, where I ultimately want to get is not where I'm at today. And, as people, learn and grow, they continue to, look forward and move forward. And I think that's important, especially who you surround yourself with. So.
Yep, 100%. So I'll round us out with this one. This is kind of more of a positive one, but it's the mistake of thinking too small. I forgot who said this, but we often overestimate what we can accomplish in 1 year, but underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. And so this is to say, I know, especially if you haven't done your first deal yet in real estate, this is all so very daunting, and how could you conceivably build a portfolio that's going to deliver you financial freedom and generational wealth for you and your family? Like, how could you even wrap your head around that when you haven't even done your first deal? And what I'll say is, Mike and I, we haven't gotten there yet, right? We're still actively chasing that dream. But with every subsequent deal and every single year that we stay in this game, our minds become more open to the possibilities of what we can achieve. Right? I'm more motivated than ever. I know Mike is more motivated than ever to build that generational wealth portfolio that's going to give us the optionality that we've, craved our entire lives. That's going to set our families and future generations up for success long after we're not here anymore, and I think that I truly in my heart believe that. I know Mike does as well. And that is not something that maybe we believed in the past. Right. And it's probably something that you don't believe right now listening to this, but do not underestimate what putting in the work over a long, consistent period of time, being passionate about what you do, being passionate and being willing to outwork a lot of people that don't have the patience, that don't have the fortitude to stay in this game for the long term. Don't underestimate just staying in the game. And being adaptable and never tapping out. And so I feel like there's probably so many failed real estate investor dreams just across the board, and I feel like there's so many people that have tapped out of it, and we don't want that to be you. We don't want that to be you. So don't think too small. Mike and I's favorite real estate investing book, The Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller, that really opened my eyes to what was possible. And the kind of main takeaways, it showed you how you can have $1 million in cash flow, a portfolio that's generating $1 million in cash flow, and how that looks over time. And, to be honest, that's what I'm shooting for. I want a portfolio that's delivering $1 million in just pure cash flow. What a concept. But that is something to strive for, and it's possible. So, Mike, what do you think about this one?
I tell people all the time, I'm at a place I never imagined I would be, and that's in 6 years. You know, I've told this story many times. I got into the industry wanting to replace my income from my previous career, you know, $60,000-$70,000 a year, whatever. And it's amazing how quickly surpassed that and have continued to escalate and continued to take on more and do more deals and build a business and you know, building that life that I want, right? That we all want. And that's where, you know, you have to, you know, you got to dream. It's something I struggle with mightily with the goal setting stuff and thinking about that and having a why and things like that. I struggle with that stuff mightily. You know, I think I'm a kind of a humble guy. I don't like to brag. I'm one of those guys, like, I just kind of let my thing do its thing. And, you know, the way I keep score is with my bank account, right? Like, I don't need the Instagramification of everything, I guess. Even though you're going to see a lot more of me on there here soon.
Mike hired a social media manager.
Yeah,
man.
I hired a social media manager. So I hired a very sharp up and coming guy to manage our social media and help us grow this podcast and help Diana and I grow our real estate business. And, you know, I have finally kind of gotten off the schneid and agreed with Diana that we want to build the real estate business more than just the two of us. We want to build out the team a little bit. It's not going to be a gigantic team. We're not going to be some team of 30 or 40. But we could probably be a team of 5 or 8 mighty agents. And, you know, I can help change other people's lives too in that regard. So that's important to her and to I. So those are things that we're looking at. And, you know, it's wild to think. It truly is. You know, once again, I don't, you know, I'm not one to gloat. You may or may not have seen this week on social media, something that popped up in 2022. Diana and I finished as the number 7 duo at KW in the Michigan and Northern Ohio region. So Keller Williams is carved up into regions, and our region is Michigan and the whole state of Michigan and Northern Ohio. And that comprises like 28 or 29 market centers. So physical Keller Williams market centers. So we kind of we were at the awards banquet in Toledo, you know, in early 2023 when we finished 7th in 2022. And we kind of looked at each other and we're like, you think we can be number 1?
Yes, you can.
Yes, we can. Right. So that was actually our one of our top goals for 2023. We wanted to be the number 1 duo in the region. And we were the number 1 duo for the first 10 months of the year. Every month the numbers came out, we were number 1. We were number 1. We were number 1. We were number 1. We got caught in November. We were number 2. But the story has a happy ending. I was grinding in December. I closed 8 deals in December, and we caught that other team back, and we took our rightful spot at number 1. And that just came out this week.
Let's
go. The region. Where I'm going at with that long story, and I apologize everyone for that long story. And I'm not here to gloat. What I'm here to tell you is there is no way in hell in 2017 as a solo agent, I thought that I would be the number 1 agent in a category that gets literally talked about at 29 market centers in my region. So, you know, just, it's something for people to understand, like, you can do this, right? Like, I'm just a regular old dude, man. You know, I'm just a dude who likes to invest in real estate. I like to talk real estate, and I like to work with investors who like to work in real estate. And that niche has enabled me to build a business that, you know, afforded me to do that make that accomplishment.
Boom. Mike, what a way to end the episode. Ladies and gentlemen, you can do this. You can do this. Mike and I are here to support you, to help you accomplish your real estate investing dreams. And you can do this. And so I'm your host, Jacob Sandoval. You can find me on all social media channels at Cashflow Saga. That's at Cashflow Saga. He is our co-host, Mike Magno. You can find him on all socials at Realtor Michael Magno. We are the Financial Freedom Fighters podcast. If you enjoyed this episode or if you enjoyed any of the other episodes, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. It would really mean the world to us. We will be back with another episode. I think we're going to be talking taxes next episode, Mike. So that's a huge, huge part of real estate investing. I'm going to bring my CPA on. It's going to be a great episode. So stay tuned for that. But we are signing off. We are the Financial Freedom Fighters podcast. Peace.
See ya.